Okay, here we go. So welcome back to MedEd Animation. The goal of this video is to be a first introduction to making vector objects move in Synfig using the basic animation tools. So I've created two little characters here. One is our fishy. Any likeness to goldfish crackers is entirely coincidental. Please don't sue me. And this other one we're calling Random Jelly, and we'll see why in a moment. And I'm going to really, even though I could blab all day about how I made the shapes and all that stuff, I'm going to really focus on just the animation-related learning objectives of this. And if you're watching this because you're in one of my workshops, you hopefully have this file available to you as a setup. So we're going to create our little aquarium here. And now we make this fishy a little smaller. And I'm actually going to do a save as, so that I keep my original one to teach you guys with, and then I can, you get it. So we're going to make this fish come halfway across the screen, move its mouth, and then finish its way across the screen. How does that sound? That sounds like a good start. So, so to get you oriented, so the fish has two parts. It's just the whole body, which has, and if I click it, I'm just gonna bring up my dots here. If you click it, you have your region. This is the fish's body, and this outer one you could see is the outline. This middle one is just a region for the eye. But they're all in this one folder. So if you use these handles, you'll be able to move around the entire fishy with all of its components. Now, the key first takeaway of this tutorial is this button here is what becomes very important in this compared to when we were just making the shapes. So when this is green, you're just making shapes like you're in PowerPoint or anything else. When you make this red, you are saying change from a previous condition to a new condition at this time point. And that could be a shape, a position, a rotation, a color change, and a bajillion other things. So I'm very careful. When I set up a scene, I make sure all my shapes are the way I want them. I do as much as I can on the front end before I turn on that animate button. The next thing you should be aware of is the keyframe. So if you find this key icon over here, this friend lets you see what keyframes exist. What is a keyframe? A keyframe is just a vital point in your movement that's like a landmark. And in traditional animation, this was important just because it was a guide. You would say, okay, I know I have 12 frames for the squirrel to jump from the ground to the tree. So let me draw those keyframes first, and then let me draw 11 other frames in between. So that was the original point. Now, in this sort of program where it's auto-in-betweening, auto-tweening, the keyframes are often the key anchors you set up, and then the computer is kind of figuring things out in between. So you automatically have a keyframe right at time 0 here. We can call it start. And let's say we want it to take 5 seconds for the fish to finish its journey across the screen. Well, if you go to Canvas Properties and go to Time, because we're now time travelers, not just image creators, time, we're going to set it to 12 frames per second, actually. Oh, and that works out because okay. And we have 60 frames total. So 12 frames in a second, 12 pictures coming to your eyeballs from the screen. And so that means at frame 60, which is 12 times 5, that's when we want it to end. So oh, I'm sorry, that was too quick. So we type in frame 60 here to navigate to that frame, or we could have used fast forward, but that would take forever, and then we go to this keyframe, we hit the plus sign, and now we have a new keyframe. And in description, I'll call it end. And by the way, but throughout this video, I'm going to hit Control S, and I'm just going to constantly say to you, save or Control S, just so you don't, have the program shut down on you or anything. So as far as navigating along the timeline, so this is your timeline, and if a few things look different here, I did recently download the new version of Synfig, which we can talk about if you're in my group, if you want to switch to that soon. It seems to be working pretty well, knock on wood. Anyway, but if you scrub through the timeline here, right now there's no movement, but there will be once we animate things. If you want to jump quickly, this JMP means jump. So if I'm at frame 60 and then I hit jump boom, it goes to that keyframe, frame 0. Versus if I just select it, like here, it's not moving what my actual timestamp is or what the cursor is on the timeline. So knowing how to move around the timeline is important. Also, I should mention, besides the play button, the fast forward button moves you 1 frame at a time. And these fast forward rewind key buttons move you between keyframes. So again, these useful landmarks are the keyframes. Okay, great. So why don't we start by just having the fish move from its start point to its end point. And I want it to move across the screen. So if I jump to the start point and I turn on the animation mode, so the person is now red, I have my fishy folder selected, and I'm just going to use the green dot to move its position off the screen over here. So we're saying, okay, at time 0, have the fish be off the screen. That's where it's going to start the scene. And then the computer is saying, okay, so I guess what you're telling me is to start there, and by the next keyframe, go to where you initially set it up, right? So that's what it thinks I want right now. And in particular, just for you to be aware, I leave these little lock symbols. That's what's causing it to happen. This is saying, if you manipulate things, keep things constant for the prior and the following keyframe. So you can manipulate that, but I usually leave them on. So now our starting point is correct, but it's not ending in the right place. So let me use the key navigation button. So fast forward from time 0 to the next keyframe, which is our end keyframe at frame 60. And I want to say, okay, when you're at time 60, animate mode's on, fishy selected, we're going to move over here. You're done going across the screen. So now I'm hitting save. And if I scrub through the timeline, the fishy now goes across. Yay! Okay, so good. So far we made 2 keyframes, we labeled them, we carefully turned animate mode on, and we told the computer where we want the object at the beginning and end. So far, a lot of this you could do in PowerPoint, right? They have like an animate paths function or something, and that's kind of about as far as you can go. So some things for you to be aware of, you might have noticed, is that these little dots, these little diamonds formed as I animated. And they're a little hard to see right now because they're at the end, but if we did one in the middle, you'd see it a little better. These are called waypoints. So a waypoint is just anything where you're telling the computer, hey, by this point, do this. And to know what it's telling the computer to do, you can move from the keyframes tab to the properties tab. Is it called properties? Parameters. Okay, that was close. And you see what it lines up with. And it's in the transformation section, and in the dropdown, it's the offset. So see, we're not rotating the angle, we're not skewing, we're not scaling, we're just moving the green dot, which is the offset. So they're nicely labeled. And let's say I decided, never mind, I don't want it to move to this point. I could actually right-click this diamond and like remove it or duplicate it, and there's other stuff, with that. Or if, let's say I said, okay, I actually want you to, by time 40, be at this point, I can actually click and drag the diamond and move it. Boop. And now it means that it's done coming off the screen sooner, right? I'm going to hit undo and hit save. Okay. So these waypoints, when things get more complicated, will let you manipulate things in time, change your decision after you've made them, and so on. There are different types of waypoints, but I think I'm going to actually hold off on teaching you that in this video, so just leaving on the default of this orange one called clamped is fine for now. All right, so he's moving across the screen. Let's say what I want him to do is move halfway across the screen, pause, move its mouth, and then keep moving. Well, let's say fine. Let's say go back to our keyframe tab, say add another keyframe at frame 24, and we'll say this is going to be when it stops or pauses, and then pauses and start mouth move, and then like at frame 33, I'm just clicking somewhere along the timeline here. I'll add another keyframe with the plus sign and call it pause and start mouth move. Let's call it end mouth move get going when it moves again. Okay, so far I've just added keyframes, but it hasn't animated anything new. So right now those don't mean anything. But if I jump to that first one and what I can do, there are a couple ways to do this, but I guess what I'll do is I want it to create a waypoint right here where currently it's just moving between these two. So I'm going to do a little trick. I'm going to select the green origin, and yeah, I'm just going to move it slightly, boop, like that. So far, before that time, it's still just moving to that point. And after that, it's still moving on. But now I have this waypoint here. So now, if I go to the end, the pause, I wanted it to still be there. But remember we said this is a property of an object. So what if I copy and paste this position, this origin, or offset, to this time point also? Well, then it would stay at the same location during this period of time. So if I put the timeline, my cursor on this point in the timeline where I wanted to end the pause, and then I go to this waypoint that I want to copy, and I right click, and sorry, my screen's a little cut off, but duplicate, boom. Now, this waypoint, that property of the offset is equal to this offset. And while these numbers are confusing, you can see that actually now these numbers don't change as far as the position of the object in between these two waypoints, versus if I go back here, you can see now these numbers are scrolling all over the place because it's moving laterally. So again, we made a waypoint appear by just moving something initially, and that made that appear. And then we went to another keyframe, and we reached for that prior key waypoint, right-clicked, and duplicated. So the property was preserved over time. There are multiple ways to do this. That's just my workflow, and it gets you used to thinking about waypoints as an individual property that you can place in time wherever you want. So the computer is now hearing you say, okay, from time 0 to time 24, I want you to go from this position to this position. Then the computer is hearing you say, from frame 24 to 33, don't change the position at all. You copied and pasted the same position for both of those. Then, from frame 33 to the end, go from that position to the end position. Okay, so far all we've done is we've used the green dot to change the position over the timeline. And we've learned what a waypoint is and a keyframe is. Got it? All right, now what if we want to make the character's mouth move a little bit during this interim pause period? Well, let's put the frame somewhere in between here. So I'm doing frame 27. I'm going to zoom in a bit. And now we're going to actually manipulate parts of the actual object. So not just the whole folder, but I'm actually going to click on the region so that now I have my region of the mouth selected, which by the way is linked to the outline as far as the individual points. And I'm just going to move the points I want to move. So let's say I want to say, okay, from frame 24 to 27, I want you to close your mouth. Well, how would you do that? Well, I'm going to click and drag and select this point here. I'm going to say, okay, by that time point, because the red dot's here, just go up and meet the top part of your mouth. I'm going to hit save. 2 frames later, I'm going to I could bring the mouth back down, or what else could I do? I could actually duplicate the starting position. So I can right click the waypoint, which is now moving 5 of these little points and things, duplicate, and it opens again. And if I say, you know what, it's taking too long to close its mouth, I wanted to do it a frame earlier, I can just drag the closed mouth waypoint we made and move it up here. And then I can move this one, and then I can go to a subsequent frame and I can right click the closed mouth shot and duplicate it, and it goes on and on. So now in between here, the fish is opening its mouth a couple times, opening and closing. Because this one waypoint, even though you're like, well, it's one point, but it's actually moving this thing, a complicated way in space, that's actually summarizing however you're moving all the vertices of that shape are embodied in this folder. But it's nice because if let's say you made in this frame, you made the tail wiggle and the mouth move and all kinds of stuff, and a few frames later you wanted to copy that position, it's still all encapsulated in that one diamond. Or you could break it down to individual points. So you have that choice. So again, now we're getting into where Synfig has a lot of power and functionality, but when you want to keep things simple, you want to know how to keep things simple. So to summarize what we just did, we started with our open mouth fish. We went a few frames in we grabbed a specific point on the region, we clicked and dragged it so it met the top of the mouth to close the mouth. Then we went a few frames out, we copied the mouth open position again, we copied that again for the closed mouth, and now we have this wiggling mouth. So at this point, I want you to know that you can preview your work at any time to make sure things look right. And so when I'm working, I'm constantly hitting the preview button to sample it. So not the what is this called in film? I don't know. Not the shuttery thing, but the camera button is a preview. Sorry, I have two screens here. And because the speed of the film we're thinking is 12 frames per second, I'll make that FPS 12. I'll put the quality kind of low because that makes the computer work faster, and I'll hit preview. And now we have a window that pops up. You can change the size of the window. So I leave it on fit so it all fits in whatever size window you have. And if you hit play, our fishy comes across, moves its mouth, and then finishes off the screen. And if I want it to loop, a lot of the time when I'm checking something, I'll have it loop back and forth so I can appraise it over and over. And that's our fish. So the kinds of animation or movement we've used Synfig for so far with the fish are, moving the parameters of a folder, which is like a group, such as translating across the screen. We could have also rotated it and scaled it and all kinds of things. But I heard the fish didn't want to be scaled. And then we selected a specific region and also animated the position of specific vertices of that shape in space. All right. So the second half of this that I want you guys to do is turn off the animate mode, and I'm going to show you a whole different convenient way of making things move in Synfig that we're going to do with our jellyfish friend here. And I called it random jelly for a specific reason. So again, we're having animate mode to green or off. We have the whole jellyfish folder selected. FYI, inside of it, you have the body of the jellyfish and then some little lines for the tentacles. And we are actually going to make this jellyfish just float around in space randomly. And so instead of me sitting here and at different time points moving it around in different positions, that would be a pain in the butt, especially if it's a long video, I can actually just tell Synfig to make it move in random ways. And how do I do that? The easiest way is simply, I have the whole folder. The green dot controls the position of the object. I can so I click the green position of the object. It doesn't work right in the field, but if I go to parameters over here, under transformation, it's automatically opening the associated green dot, which is this offset. I right-click offset, and I go to convert, and it'll give you this long menu of weird like math stuff and all kinds of things you don't want to think about. But there's an option called random here. And if I click random, you see it actually wiggled a little bit. And that's because now when I open this offset folder, it has a link, which is a starting position, a radius, which is how far it's allowed to move. So I'll just make that a little bigger. We'll say 5. And then a speed, skip seed for now, but a speed is like how fast it's moving around. And so actually, to be honest, the jellyfish should probably be like 0.5, like kind of a slower speed, but it's kind of trial and error. And then, as I scrub through, you can see that the jellyfish is sort of just like moving around on its own. So this is a really convenient way if you have like, cells that are activated in an animation, or you have a bee or a fly that's just kind of hovering around. You can do it that way. So why don't you try doing that, just so you get the basic principles, and make sure when you hit preview that you have the fish and the jellyfish moving around. And we do. And now we have our first aquarium. Yay! All right, so I think I'll stop there just so you get the basics, and let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you in the next video.